Hello, this week you guys are reading about ancient Rome. And ancient Rome's an interesting study because, in a way, it does kind of resemble somewhat of America. And that's a little scary. Ancient Rome was huge. It stretched from England to Iraq. So, all around the Mediterranean, it was large. It's the largest imperial power. Because of that, there were a lot of battles on the outskirts with other communities, which the Romans called barbarians. Now, these could have been Vikings, they could have been Persians, but to Rome, anyone who wasn't Roman was a barbarian. So you didn't have much choice. It started out as a republic, which is what we have. You vote for a representative. Now, in America, our republic's kind of open. We can vote for whoever runs, though we do have it down to parties. In Rome, it was a very restricted group of people that you could choose from. They were the wealthy families that had wealth built up. So, wealthy older families. So this caused them to have a very small group that often became corrupted by wanting more money. So soon that became a problem, particularly because the leaders, the two heads of the republic, called the consuls, they were in charge of the military. And they weren't military men. And neither were the armies. The armies were not really built to be military men. Many of the armies started out, it was a volunteer army, and it started out as kind of this free men's army that were landowners with wealth. However, they weren't fighters. So that became a problem as well. Eventually, Rome changed. A soldier named Marcus is the one that ended up changing the military by opening up to people who didn't have property and who might have been better at battles, which made the Roman army stronger, which meant that the military became stronger. And soon Rome became an imperial power. And it became an imperial power under the famous Julius Caesar. Julius Caesar, of course, was famous general, and then declared himself the emperor of Rome. He was murdered, so you gotta remember that. Doesn't necessarily pay to be emperor. Alright, so the beginning of Rome. Mythologically, the legend is that Rome was founded by the twins Romulus and Remus, who amazingly suckled from a she-wolf. And they were these great warriors. So again, it established as a republic, but soon became an imperial power. And after it became an imperial power, it was ruled by Caesars, but this was in a family line. So Julius Caesar didn't have any sons, but he did adopt a nephew, Octavian, who then became Caesar Augustus. And eventually there were lots of other Caesars along the line, with the last Caesar being there. So you can see I have a family tree of all the Caesars listed for you. The art in Rome wasn't quite like the art in Greece. There wasn't so much a religious bend to it. Instead, it became more propaganda, partly because it was sponsored. So these people that were running for offices in the Republic and the Senate would often pay for sculpture to be done, and thus the sculpture became kind of propaganda. And then after the emperor was chosen, there was certainly even more in that, with, sculptures kind of idolizing the different Caesars and making them seem almost godlike. So I gave you some pictures. Their architecture was great. One of the, again, lots of it borrowed from Greece. You'll see the Forum of Trajan, which was an impressive monument during Augustus's reign. Caesar Augustus. That was Julius Caesar's nephew. And that was built to be the center of Rome, and it still kind of remains. And it's basically a marketplace as well as a social and political center. So there was, again, that was kind of built for Caesar Augustus. But it was built a lot on some of the stylings of the Greeks. There were these columns. The column at Trajan is one of the most impressive because around the column is a spiral that tells a story in a continuous scene. So again, it's kind of like, it's a little bit, reminds you of the Greek, and it also kind of has a little bit of an influence from the Chinese scroll work. So Rome had many buildings. They really did do a lot of architecture. However, most of their buildings were for purpose. They had basilicas where they could talk about their legal and political affairs. They had temples for religious ceremonies. And they had these baths where people could kind of lounge in pools and gossip and socialize. And they also had lots of libraries. And in Rome, women weren't restricted. So they could go and read in the libraries. And a lot of them were filled with literature that appealed to women. Their greatest architectural item was the arch. That's really what they brought to the table and created. And arches were extremely valuable because they could support the weight and distribute it. So they allowed for many, many different types of architecture. There was the barrel vault, which was tremendously used and was often a support for building foundations. The cross vault, which was usually connected to a series of 3 balls to open. The dell created a spacious and majestic interior space, of which a great example was the Parthenon. And the most spectacular interiors were built and open, devoted to recreation. Again, Roman baths were kind of this combination of a beauty salon, a public library, shopping mall. And the greatest bath was the bath at Caracalla, which has separate swimming pools, gymnasiums, massage and steam rooms, restaurants, libraries. We're talking pretty cool place. Now, the Parthenon was by far the greatest architectural sculpture for Rome, and it was famous for its magnificent dome rising above the interior imperfect hemisphere, resting on a cylinder of the exactly the same diameter. The Parthenon was built by the Emperor Hadrian at the height of the Roman imperial power. The temple was dedicated to the 7 planetary gods, although Hadrian also used it for Senate meetings and other ceremonial occasions. The dome was punctuated by 30-foot opening called the oculus, and the oculus was the principal sort of light inside the building and also repeated in the exterior geometric motif. This was the first time you had this kind of interior light from this one source, this skylight. As far as family life, it was relatively modest. Rome's domestic characters are often depicted in art and sculpture. And we do have one really great example of life in Rome, and that is Pompeii. Pompeii was a city that was near a volcano, and the volcano erupted and the whole city was covered in 15 feet of ash. And it preserved everybody at the moment of their death. So we can see how people actually lived by looking at them. As far as theater, our greatest our greatest comedy writer was Terence, and the most important tragedy writer was Seneca. And he often rewrote Greek plays, including Oedipus, and made them much more graphic and violent. So that was a lot of it. They also created the idea of pantomime, where there'd be dramatic works that the actors didn't speak. Roman theaters were giant structures with multi-storied stages. Their auditoriums could accommodate as much as 60,000 spectators. The stage was narrow and raised. Behind the stage was a facade called the Cynephrons, which rose 2 or 3 stories high. So there was pretty big deal with the theater. So plays were important. As far as music, they did create this organ, which kind of resembles the beginning of a pipe organ, and again had more religious purposes, and eventually was even kind of, because it was used against Christians, even though the pipe organ became a symbol in the Roman Catholic Church, this particular device, this hydraulis, was actually banned from early Christian because of its relationship to Christian persecution. Poets, one of the most important poets include Catullus, who was a lyric poet, and he kind of resembled some of the stuff that Sappho wrote. And then Ovid, of course, who wrote the masterpiece Metamorphosis. They were also the greatest novel-length poem, the greatest epic poem from Rome was, of course, the Aeneid, which was written by Virgil. The Aeneid unifying theme is destiny, and the poem bestows upon Aeneas a destiny that was anticipated in Augustus's own. Again, this was kind of a tribute to Caesar Augustus. In one literary form, the Romans claimed superiority over the Greeks. They excelled in verse satire, an autistic form that wittily ridicules human folly or vice, often with the aim to improve individuals or societies. One of the greatest of these satirists was Horace, a contemporary of Virgil's. He wrote 2 books of satires in the mid-30s. Another great satirist was Juvenal. Juvenal attacked corruption and hypocrisy in Roman society at the height of its wealth and self-indulgence. Few aspects of Roman society escaped his satirical wit. He talked about the sexual deprivation, the extravagant banquets, the influence of the Greeks, and the folly of the emperors. He reached his climax in his famous 10th satire, where he exposes the vanity of human desire for wealth and fame, and he calls for a life of patient humility that would be echoed by the Renaissance satirist Aramis and the satirical geniuses of the 18th century Europe. As far as philosophy, one of the first influential philosophers was a politician, Marcus Tullius Cicero, who adapted kind of the Greek Stoic thoughts in his writings. And Cicero's unmatched achievement for stylistic speeches composed as he strove to save Rome's republic from the imperial dictatorship, and of course lost. Lucretius was another one. He had poems that elaborated the Epicurean thoughts of the classical. Lucretius's description of movement and collision of atoms as they combined to form the physical universe, had a moral purpose. He hoped to relieve his readers of their guilt and fear of death. The gods have no power over our lives, he advised, and so cannot punish humans for our impropriety. So, educated Romans were more easily drawn to this Hellenistic philosophy of Stoicism, which taught that one must do one's duty, practice moral virtue, and submit to divinely ordered destiny. Roman Stoicism developed through several stages, but its origin was in the Hellenistic or Greek philosophy. Alright, so that's basically it on Rome. I assigned for you guys this time a documentary. I'm also going to put a copy of Juvenal's 10th Satire for you if you want to read it. I'm not going to be quizzing you on it, but it's for your own kind of information. I do want to apologize for some typos. I'm not the world's greatest typer, so sometimes I do make mistakes. So I apologize for that. If you see any major typos, you can let me know and I'll try to fix them. I usually in the PowerPoints it gets away from me sometimes. This week I'm asking you to choose. You're going to watch the first documentary about the rise and fall of Rome that I have listed, and then I'm going to ask you to pick another of 13 episodes and kind of give me some information about it and tell me a little bit about it. So hopefully you'll kind of learn a little bit about Rome. Rome was really very much a militaristic issue. The military in Rome kind of ran its history and kind of took over everything and ultimately led to its downfall. That and this kind of unbridled capitalism that caused them to really embrace money and riches, and with it came some depravity. The Romans were certainly known for their large feasts and their kind of sexual exploits. So these were people that kind of, as we say, sinned quite a bit. Alright, so enjoy reading about Rome, and we will be heading from Rome to the monotheistic religions, meaning the religions of one God. So far, all of our cultures had multi-God religions, but Christianity, Judaism, and Islam all have one God. Alright, see you next week.